Daf Lamed Vav. And we'll start with El Omarov at the end of the second line. We don't have to change the Girsa Hachikoma. This is what we're going to say according to Rabbi Yochanan. Hakones Yevimto v'nimtzeis muberes harezu lo tinase tzarasa. So you have two Yevamos, two tsaros that fell for Yibum. And the Yavam was Kones, he was Miyabim, one of these two tsaros, and that should l'chora free the other tzara from Zikas Yibum, allow her to marry anyone in the shuk? No. Rabbi Yochanan says she should not marry anyone from the shuk. Why? Shema Yehe Vlad ben Kayoma, and therefore Ubias Muberes Lo Shma Bia v'chalitzas Muberes Lo Shma Chalitza. On the side that the Vlad is a viable Vlad, viable baby, then the Bia of Yibum is not called a Bia, and Chalitza is not called Chalitza. So therefore the Tzara can't get married. Why? Because even though if the husband has children, there's no Zikas Yibum, and she's free to get married, but that's because the Vlad, in this case, Eino Poter, could not be Matir the Yevamal Ashuk, and certainly not the Tzara. Right now she's pregnant, and the Vlad is not yet born. As long as the Vlad has not popped its head out, it's considered as if the Baal has no children, and therefore she's not permitted to the shuk. Even if the child that's being developed in the womb of the Yevama that had Yibum is a Vlad Shel Kayoma, Ben Kayoma, but nevertheless, she cannot get married until the Vlad is Yotza Li'Avir Olam. And Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are at loggerheads in Bias Muberes and in Chalitzas Muberes, if it's Shma Bia or not Shma Bia, if it's Shma Chalitza or not Shma Chalitza. And Tanya Kavosei de Rava, now the Gemara is going to bring a proof to support Rava that the Vlad is not matir the Yevama or the Tzara for the Shuk until it's Yotza L'Avir Olam. Hakones Yevimto v'nimtzeis muberes harezu lo tinase tzarasa shema ye Vlad ben Kayoma v'ein bia v'chalitza poteres ela Vlad poter v'Vlad eino pocha ad sheyetze li'avir olam. We don't have anything more explicit than what's written in this brisa. And only after the Leda does the Yevama and her tzara become pturim, or pturos, we should say, mizikas yibum and mutaras lashuk. The Gemara raises the following kasha from this brisa. Let's be medayik time of the reason why the bia of yibum is, in the case where she's pregnant, not a bia, and it cannot remove the zikas yibum. The shema yehi Vlad ben Kayomahu ha. On the side that if at the end of the day lo yehi Vlad shel Kayoma, she miscarries or whatever, and now l'mafreya we see that she was a bas yibum, niftera tzarasa, that's against Reish Lakish. Because then we're saying that the tzara becomes ptura, the bias hamuberes, that bias hamuberes, the yibum of a pregnant yevama shma bia. And there's no need for the yavam to be boiler again after the Apollo to pat up the tzara. Is lemet yavichuv to Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is of the opinion that bias muberes sheipila eino bia v'chalitzasa eina chalitza. And the brisa is meduyak that if the Vlad is not a Vlad Shel Kayoma, and the Yavam was Miyabim, he was Kones as a Yevama, the Tzara is Nifteres Bibiyasa, and that Bias Muberes Shmei Bia. This is how we should write the Girsa of the Brisa. Akones es Yevimto, Venimtzeis Meuberes, Harezu lo tinose Tzarasa, Shema lo Yehe Havlad Shel Kayom. Not Yehe Havlad Shel Kayom, but Shelo Yehe Havlad Shel Kayom. V'chalitzas Muberes, in a case where the Vlad at the end of the day is an Eno Ben Kayoma, Loshma Chalitzo, Bias Muberes, Loshma Bia. And therefore, she cannot get married because the Bia of the Muberes is not a Bia, and it cannot pat up the Tzara. The Tzara can't get married. Now, the Brisa added the word Shavlad Eno Potro, Apparently, we're talking about a Vlad Shel Kayoma. And the halacha that patas up Yibum is only after Leda. No. You know what it means? Im Tomar halachacha rov noshim. And rov noshim Vlad mi'alya yilodon. Most pregnant women will carry to full term and give birth to a viable child. If that be the case, then even though the bia is not a bia, nevertheless we should be relying upon Rov to say the Vlad is a Vlad Shel Kayoma, which means that the late brother has a child, and she and the Tzara are not skukos at all to Yibum. There's no zikas Yibum, the feel for Yibum. They're allowed to get married immediately. Therefore, the Brisa says that even because of the Vlad who may become a Vlad Shel Kayoma, but it wasn't Yotze Liavra Olam, she still's Kuka Liyibum because her Vlad ain't no poter she Yotze Liavra Olam. Omer Rabbi Lozer, Efshar Isa Lahadre Shlokish, below Tananlon B'Masnisa. Is it possible that we pass in halacha k'reish lakish that bia v'chalitzas muberes loshma bia v'chalitza in the Mishnah omitted it? How could that be? Why would Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, if we pass like k'reish lakish, omit such a very important halacha? How could he omit it from the Mishnayos and Yevamot? It's basic to the Masechet. Nafak Dok V'Ashka. Rebbe Loza went out. He was very careful about his examination, and he found a diuk in a Mishnah that would support Reish Lakish. Isnan, we have a Mishnah daf Kuf Yud Tes. Ha'isha shaholach baila v'holcha tzarasa l'medina sayam. Ukshaholach lo hayulo banim. So the husband has no children. They went, he and one of his wives, out to Medina Sayyam, Bo v'yamrula. They notified the woman who's here, who didn't go to Medina Sayyam, Meis Bailech, your husband died. Tarezu lo tinase, she should not get married to the shuk. Velotis yabem, acheteda, Shema Muberesi Tzarasa. First find out if she, the Tzara, who went to Medina Sayyam with her husband, is pregnant. Bishlemi Bumelo. I understand why she's Asur Liyavam, Lisyamim, because we afraid lest her Tzara is Muberes. And Shema, maybe her Tzara will give birth via Vlad Shel Kayoma. If that be the case, then there's no Yibum and there's an Eishis Ach Erva. The Yifka B'Yisra Eishis Ach Doraisa. Ella Lo Tachlots Amai. Why can't we give a Chalitza and let her get married to the Shuk? Bishleim El Shalot Tachlots bitoch tisha. We understand that if we're still within the 9 months since the late brother passed away, is in that case, lo, she cannot get married because Haidu suffered. We really don't know if the Muberes, Hatzara, will give birth to a Vlad Shel Kayom or not. And we're holding now that on the tzad that she'll give birth to a Vlad Shel Kayom, the Chalitz and the Yibum are not potrid. We need the latest Havlad, like we said. So she still has Surah L'Shuk. Ella, but why not Tachlotz B'tok Tisha? Count out within the 9-month period of time since her late husband died. V'tinase liachar Tisha. Let her get married after Tisha. Why are you telling me that she has to wait to find out what the story is with the Sarah? She's muteres l'shuk mimon afshach. If the Sarah gives birth to a Vlad Sheina Shel Kayoma, or perhaps she wasn't even pregnant, so her husband died without children, and she needs chalitza, so her chalitza is a valid chalitza, and it should work even within 9 months. And it should have the status of chalitzas muberes, according to Rabbi Yochanan, which is effective. And if Hatzara will give birth to a Vlad Shel Kayoma, then after 9 months, Hare Kvar Yotza Vlad Liavarola. And her husband, her late husband, left a child. So she doesn't fall for him at all. She doesn't need chalitza. She's B'tes L'Shuk. So why wouldn't they be matir chalitza during the 9-month period, unless we assume that if the tzara was muberes at the time of the chalitza, and she would give birth to a Vlad she'ena shel kayoma, that chalitza is not a chalitza. It's not effective. It's not meaningful. Because bias muberes for chalitzas muberes ain't klum. Even if at the end of the day she miscarries. And this is a clear-cut proof to Reish Lakish that chalitza and bias muberes ain't klum. And that was the drush that we had of Reish Lakish of Ayin Olah. Mar asks a kasha Rebbe Lazar, Uletaymech. According to your interpretation of the Mishnah, that she cannot have chalitza and get married because we're afraid that maybe Hatzara is muberes and chalitzas muberes eina klum, like Reish Lakish. If that be the case, why is there an Easter to marry until? Why shouldn't there be, I say, an Easter to marry only until we clarify whether the tzara is muberes? Why is she asurli nase afilu liachar kamashanin? We should say tachlots at the end of the 9 months lemisaso, according to Reish Lakish. And at that point, the tzara is certainly not muberes. It's after 9 months. V'tinase liachar tisha, and after the full 9 months pass, she should be able to get married. Elabar minomi ahi. We cannot bring a riot from that Brisa to Reish Lakish, from the fact that the Brisa says that there should not be chalitza toch tes and tinase liachar tes. The reason is not because of a chashash of being matir Yevamot l'shuk, but a totally different chashash. Abaye bar Abba v'Rav Chinana bar Abaye, the Amrei Travayu, Shema Yehi Vlad ben Kayoma. There should not be any chalitza until we know whether the tzara is pregnant or not. If she's pregnant, she may give birth to a viable child, and then the chalitza was shalol tzara. There was no yibum, there was no zika, there was no chalitza, and she's ksheira l'kahuna. She can marry a kohen because any chalitza was meaningless. But now if people see that she is getting a chalitza, they don't know that the chalitza is meaningless. They're going to assume the chalitza is a real chalitza, and therefore she should be psul l'kuna. Nimtzata matzricha kruz l'kuna. You're going to have to notify the people that chalitza in a fog, yell it out from the rooftops that she's ksher l'kuna. So therefore, they said lo tachlots, no chalitza, until we know for sure if the tzar is muberes. So the Gemara asks, Vilatzricha, why don't we require this announcement, this public, cruise? What's the chashash that she'll need a cruise, and because that chashash, you're telling her that she's not allowed to get married until she knows for sure that the tzara is or is not muberes. And the Gemara answers, Dilma ika inchi navi b'chalitza below havi b'chachraz. There may be spectators who were there at the time of the chalitza. They weren't there to hear the achraza that she's ksher l'kuna. The asi l'meimer kashari chalutza l'kohen, and they'll see that they were masader kiddushin for her to a kohen. They're going to assume that a chalutza is allowed to marry a kohen. Abai says to Rabbi Loza, Midi lo tachlots v'lo tisyamim ktani. Did the Brisa say that there shouldn't be chalitza because of the fear, the possibility of a tzara muberes? And chalitzas muberes ain't a chalitza. She can't get married even if there was a chalitza. Lo tinase v'lo tisyamim ktani. It says that we don't want them to say in the Brisa, all that it says is lo tinase l'shuk b'li chalitza. We're not going to rely and say that since most women will give birth to a vlad shel kayoma, therefore the tzara gave birth after 9 months, and there's no need for chalitza. Aval I chalitzla. If there were chalitza, even within 9 months, hachinami the sharia, she should be muteres say after 9 months, because the bia the chalitza muteres shma bia chalitza. So we can interpret this brisa even according to Rabbi Yochanan. There's no proof the Reish Lakish, but Tanya Kavose the Reish Lakish. We have a clear-cut proof for Reish Lakish from the following brisa: hacholetz lemuberes v'hipila. Sricha chalitza menachem. We need an additional chalitza. Because even though at the end of the day she gave birth to a vlad, of Apollo, Nefel, Shena Shel Kayoma, and therefore there is a zikas yibum, but since the chalitza was implemented at the time that she was pregnant, lav shmei chalitza, and she needs chalitza from the brothers. There are 3 halachas where we're going to paskin like Reish Lakish. Chada hadamoron, what we learned just now, that bia v'chalitzas muberes lav shmei bia v'lav shlei chalitza, and idach, the second one, disnan, and this is a Mishnah I believe in Baba Basra. Let me just double check that. He says to look in Mesorsa Shaz Zayin. Yeah, Babasur Kuf Chavav. Hamachalik Nechos Valpiv. A man is divvying up his will, his last will and testament, and he's dividing up his possessions, his properties to his heirs before his death. And in this process of dividing up his estate, he didn't say the words Mishum Yerusha, but rather he said Mishum Matana. I'm giving it to so-and-so as a gift, so-and-so as a gift. And therefore, if he gave less to one son and more to another son, and the Bechar, he gave the exact same amount as the other brothers instead of what the Torah requires, Pishnayim, Dvarav Kayomim. We have a principle of Yesh Koach B'Yadam Lahasnos Tnai Shebamama. He can add a condition to Dinim Amas, even if that's not the way the Torah had visioned the Dinim Amas. The Im Amar Mishum Yerusha, but if when he divvied up his possessions, he said that this is a Yerusha, like my son so-and-so inherited or will inherit my field in that spot. My other son will inherit the other orchard, etc., etc. And the Bechar got the exact amount as all the other brothers. Lo Omar Klum. Why? Because Minat Torah, the Bechar gets Pishnayim from the Nechsei Ovid. And the other brothers should get an equal amount from the remainder after we give Pishnayim to the Bechar. And now he's dividing up in a way that he's Masna Mashikosa B'Torah and Masna Mashikosa B'Torah Tno Batel. But Kosav, when he divvied up his possessions, he wrote both Yerusha and Matana. Bein b'tchila, bein b'sof, bein b'emtza, mishum matana dvarav kayom. It matters not whether he writes the lashon matana at the beginning, like he says tinasin sada plonis lebni ploni, and then he adds the word v'yirashena. Bein basof, if he says yirash b'ni ploni sada plonis v'tinasin lo, bein ba'emtza, yiresh b'ni ploni sada zu v'tinasin lo v'yirusha, kevan shehizkir b'shtar shemachalik mishum matana dvarav kayomim. This is not a Yerusha. He's not changing the laws and the regulations of Yerusha, but rather he is giving it as an outright gift, and therefore Dvarav Kayom. He is not undermining the Torah law. And Omer Shlokish the Olam Lo Konad Shiyomer Ploni Ploni Yirshu Yirashu Sadeh Plonis uplonis shenesatem lahem b'matana v'yirashim. This is on the top of Lamed Vav Beis. If he gave his nechasim to two different people who are not Yorshim, and he said Yirash Ploni Sada Plonis, B'tinasin Sada Plonis LePloni. In one case, he commanded it b'lashon Yerusha, the other in lashon Matana. Ravin says the name Rabbi Yochanan. Once he mentions the name Matana, the whole thing is considered a matana. Even that portion that he called the Yerusha. And everyone's zocha. Because his entire Nesin is considered a matana. And on this Amar Reish Lakish, that's not the din. Li olam lo kana, the person who he gave B'lashon Yerusha is anu omrim shalazed nasa matana lazed nasa and Yerusha. And since he used a lashon Yerusha, ein adam zera shoy liyarsho, he's not an heir, is lo zachem in a chasim at sheyomar, until he uses a lashon matana ploni uploni yirashu sada plonis uplonis shenesatim lahem bimatana, and then v'yirash. Okay, then so we're up to the Ida.